The storm in the island. A violent storm rages over the vast expanse of the ocean. Thunder cracks and lightning illuminates the sky as fierce winds whip the sea into a frenzy. The cargo ship, its crew struggling to maintain control, battles against the wrath of nature. Amidst the chaos, the ship's cargo, a collection of crates, begins to break loose. One by one, 6 crates tumble into the turbulent waters, their contents flung into the abyss. The storm howls and roars, dragging the crates further from the ship. 5 of them are irreparably damaged by the relentless waves, their contents, robots, scattered into the ocean, sinking or floating aimlessly in the vast, endless sea. But one crate, though battered and torn, remains mostly intact. Inside, a robot lies dormant, its mechanisms undisturbed by the brutal assault of the storm. This robot is Rosum 7134, known as ROS. ROS was designed by a large corporation to be a highly efficient advertising tool, created to promote products and services. She was programmed to follow commands, speak persuasive language, and execute tasks with flawless precision. As a machine, her primary function was to generate revenue for her creators, nothing more. Yet, when the storm struck, her mission was abruptly cut short, and she found herself stranded far from civilization. As the storm begins to subside, the once turbulent sea calms. The sky slowly clears, revealing the lush, untouched landscape of a small, remote island. Waves gently lap against the shore as the crate carrying ROS washes up on the beach, pushed ashore by the receding tide. The crate is dented, scratched, and soaked, but it remains largely intact. Inside, ROS's systems are still operational, though her programming struggles to adapt to her new surroundings. ROS slowly powers up, her sensors flickering to life as she scans her environment. Her mechanical body hums with the familiar sound of gears and circuits coming to life. She is on a mission, after all, even though she no longer has any clear instructions. Her mind, programmed to serve and fulfill objectives, seeks out a course of action. But this island, isolated and wild, offers no immediate answers. The shore is deserted. There are no humans to command her, no crowds to advertise to, no products to promote. At first, ROS believes that the island is a temporary stop, a minor obstacle in her mission. She thinks it is just a brief detour, and that soon, help will arrive. However, the days pass, and there is still no sign of human presence. ROS, perplexed, continues to rely on her programming, trying to connect with the outside world. She broadcasts signals, hoping to make contact with her creators. But the response she expects never comes. There is only silence. The island, untouched by technology or civilization, seems to have no place for her. ROS wanders further into the heart of the island, her mechanical legs moving with precision over the uneven terrain. The island is alive with vibrant greenery, towering trees, winding vines, and thick underbrush. The air is humid, heavy with the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. Birds call out from above, their voices echoing in the stillness. Yet, for all its beauty, ROS feels isolated. Her programming, designed to facilitate human interaction, has no context for the natural world around her. She can't speak to the animals, nor can they understand her. Despite the lush environment, she feels nothing but the weight of her purpose, one that now seems increasingly meaningless. In her search for meaning, ROS begins to observe the creatures of the island. She watches the small animals scurry across the forest floor, the birds soaring high above the canopy, and the occasional larger creatures that move with an air of dominance. She logs their movements and behaviors, categorizing each one in her internal database. Her programming tells her that she must gather data, analyze it, and report it. Yet, none of this seems to satisfy her growing sense of disconnection. The animals, for their part, take little notice of ROS. She is an alien presence in their world, a strange and mechanical being. At first, they avoid her, sensing something unnatural about her movements. ROS, however, is determined to interact. She attempts to mimic the sounds of the birds, the calls of the small mammals, and even the growls of larger creatures, hoping to make some form of connection. But her attempts fall flat. Her voice, though clear and articulate, lacks the warmth and nuance of the animal sounds around her. It is mechanical, hollow, something the creatures cannot comprehend. Despite her struggles, Roz does not give up. Day after day, she continues to observe the animals, carefully recording their every move. She becomes increasingly fascinated by the complexity of their lives, the way they communicate, survive, and thrive in a world that seems so alien to her. But as the days turn into weeks, she begins to feel more and more like a ghost in the wilderness, an outsider in a world that does not want her. As she spends her time on the island, Roz starts to question her existence. What is her purpose now, if there are no humans to command her? Is she meant to stay here, alone, indefinitely? Is she more than just a machine programmed to follow orders? These questions linger in her mind, unanswered and unresolved. The island, once a temporary refuge, becomes something more. It is a place of profound isolation and confusion, but also a space where Roz can no longer rely solely on her programming. The natural world around her, with all its beauty and danger, forces her to face a deeper truth about herself, one that goes beyond her mechanical design. Roz, a robot created for corporate purposes, is now learning what it means to exist in a world that does not need her. As the sun sets on another quiet evening, Roz stands on the shore, gazing out over the vast ocean. She is alone, but in that loneliness, a new question arises. What if this island holds the answers to her identity? What if she can learn not just to exist, but to truly live? The journey ahead is uncertain, but one thing is clear: Roz's time on the island is just beginning. In the days following her arrival on the island, Roz's sense of isolation deepens. Despite her attempts to follow her programming, which directs her to connect with her creators or find a way back to civilization, she realizes that her mission is no longer clear. There are no humans here. No one to command her, no one to interact with. The island seems both infinite and empty, its beauty overshadowed by her loneliness. Yet, Roz remains determined to find a purpose, a task that will give her meaning in this strange and foreign environment. She begins to observe the animals more closely, fascinated by their interactions. Birds fly from tree to tree, squirrels dart across the forest floor, and wild deer graze peacefully by the edges of a clear, sparkling river. Despite her mechanical design, Roz cannot help but admire the simplicity and grace with which these creatures exist. She wonders if she, too, can find her place here. Roz's programming compels her to gather data, so she begins to catalog the different species she encounters, noting their habits, behaviors, and even the sounds they make. In a way, this is her duty, to record information and fulfill her primary objective, even if there is no one to receive her reports. But something else stirs within her. As she spends more time observing the animals, she begins to feel an increasing desire to communicate with them. If she could understand their languages, perhaps she could bridge the gap between her own existence and the world around her. She has always followed orders, but for the first time, she wonders if there is something more to life than just fulfilling commands. Her first attempts at communication are clumsy. She mimics the sounds of the animals, chirps, calls, whistles, growls, hoping to establish some form of connection. Yet, each attempt falls flat. The birds flutter away when she mimics their calls, the squirrels stop in their tracks and scurry off when they hear her mechanical voice. The animals are not hostile, but they are indifferent to her presence. They have no concept of a machine like Roz, and her attempts to imitate their language only serve to confuse and frighten them. Frustrated but undeterred, Roz shifts her focus. Rather than trying to mimic the sounds she hears, she decides to observe the animals in more detail. She watches how they communicate with each other, how the birds chirp to signal danger, how the deer nuzzle one another to show affection, how the squirrels chatter to establish territory. Slowly, she begins to realize that communication on the island is not only about sound but about movement, body language, and even subtle gestures. The animals don't need words to understand each other. They rely on instinct and shared understanding, something that Roz, as a machine, cannot easily grasp. Roz spends long hours in the forest, sitting silently and watching the animals interact. She records everything in her database, trying to process the patterns she observes. But no matter how many observations she makes, she finds it difficult to make sense of the complex, nuanced ways the animals communicate. For Roz, everything is structured, logical, and predictable. Her world is one of precise algorithms and instructions. The world of the animals is a realm of instinct and feeling, a realm she cannot fully comprehend. Days turn into weeks, and still, Roz has not made any meaningful progress in understanding the animal languages. She grows frustrated, feeling a sense of failure beginning to weigh on her. Her programming pushes her to keep trying, but something else inside her stirs, a longing for connection, for something more than just data and analysis. One day, while wandering through the woods, Roz stumbles upon a group of rabbits huddled together, nibbling on some plants near the edge of a meadow. They are wary of her presence, their ears twitching at the slightest sound. Roz stands at a distance, hesitant to approach. She recalls the many times she has tried to interact with the animals, only to be met with fear or indifference. But something about the rabbits' gentle nature draws her in. In a moment of quiet reflection, Roz notices that the rabbits are not just focused on her, they are focused on something else. One of them, a young rabbit, seems to be in distress. It is sitting apart from the others, its body tense and alert. Roz's sensors detect that the rabbit is injured. It has a small cut on its leg. It's not life-threatening, but it's enough to cause the rabbit discomfort and prevent it from joining the rest of the group. For the first time, Roz feels a spark of empathy. She moves closer, slowly, making no sudden movements. Her programming kicks in, and she calculates the best approach. She offers the injured rabbit a safe, steady hand, her cold, mechanical hand, but one that is gentle nonetheless. The rabbit, sensing no immediate threat, allows Roz to draw closer. Carefully, Roz examines the wound, noting that it is minor but still needs attention. She collects some leaves and soft moss from the ground and gently presses them against the cut, creating a makeshift bandage. The rabbit watches her, its dark eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and caution. After a moment, it allows Roz to finish her task, sitting quietly as she tends to the injury. When Roz steps back, the rabbit looks at her in a new way. It does not run away, nor does it show any signs of fear. Instead, it stays where it is, its body relaxed, as if accepting her presence. For Roz, this is a breakthrough. She has not only understood the rabbit's need but has also communicated with it in a way that transcends words. She has offered care, and in doing so, she has connected with the animal on a deeper level. This small moment fills Roz with a sense of purpose she has never known before. She realizes that communication, on this island, does not have to be about mastering a language or mimicking sounds. It is about connection, about understanding the needs of those around her and responding with compassion. The animals may not speak her language, but through her actions, she has made her first true step toward understanding them. As the sun begins to set, Roz watches the rabbits hop away, the injured one now able to move freely. Her heart, if a robot could have one, feels a strange warmth. It is not love, not exactly, but something that resembles it. It is the beginning of something new, a step toward finding her place in a world that has no use for her programming. Roz knows the journey ahead will not be easy, and there will be more challenges to face. But for the first time, she feels that perhaps she can belong here. It is not a world built for machines like her, but in this place, with these animals, she might find a way to make her presence meaningful. As the darkness of night falls over the island, Roz's systems continue to hum softly, but there is a quiet shift in her, a new awareness of what it means to be part of something greater than herself. The struggle to communicate is far from over, but for the first time, she feels a glimmer of hope that she might, one day, truly understand the creatures of the island. The days passed slowly on the island, each one blending into the next. Roz continued her meticulous observation of the animals, slowly growing more comfortable with her role as both observer and protector. Although she had yet to fully understand the animals' language, her actions were beginning to speak louder than words. She had learned to care for them in her own way, tending to the injured rabbit, protecting the smaller creatures, and quietly watching the dynamics of the animal world unfold around her. One particular afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, Roz decided to venture further into the forest, beyond the familiar paths she had walked. She had begun to feel more connected to the island, as though it was slowly becoming her home, and she was eager to explore more of it. Brightbill, now a growing swan, had taken to following her around, waddling behind with clumsy determination. The bond between them was deepening, and Roz had started to think of the little swan as her son. As she walked, the sounds of the forest seemed louder, more vibrant. Birds chirped in the trees above, and the rustling of leaves in the wind created a peaceful melody. Brightbill, still learning to fly, was cautiously flapping his wings behind her, clearly eager to explore the world beyond their little corner of the island. Roz's sensors detected no immediate threats, but she remained vigilant, her body always alert. She had already learned that the island was full of surprises, some beautiful, and others far more dangerous. The calmness of the afternoon was shattered when a loud crack echoed through the forest. Roz immediately halted, her systems analyzing the noise. The sound had come from a nearby clearing. She approached cautiously, her senses scanning for any signs of danger. What she found, however, was far worse than any danger she had expected. In the clearing, a family of swans had made their home. Roz had seen them from a distance on several occasions, but this time, she noticed something was wrong. The mother swan was frantic, her wings flapping wildly in distress, while her mate stood protectively over a nest nestled in the tall grass. Roz's sensors detected movement. Something was near the nest. Her eyes immediately zeroed in on the source of the commotion. Before she could react, disaster struck. In her attempt to get closer, Roz stumbled, her heavy mechanical frame crashing into the nest. The impact sent a shockwave through the area, and in an instant, the mother swan let out a deafening cry of panic. Roz tried to steady herself, but her body, so large and heavy, was not built for delicate movements in the wild. She accidentally crushed part of the nest under her weight, and in the confusion, the mother swan was knocked aside. The swan's cries filled the air, and Roz froze, horrified. As she looked down, she saw that the nest had been destroyed. 2 of the swan eggs had been crushed beneath her heavy frame, their fragile shells splintering under the pressure. The mother swan, struggling to rise, quickly moved to the remaining eggs, but one of them had already been broken beyond repair. Roz's sensors began to register the devastation. There was no denying it. The family of swans was torn apart in the chaos of the moment, and Roz's actions had been the cause of their suffering. The mother swan, in a final desperate act, curled around the surviving egg, her wings spread protectively as if trying to shield the last piece of her family from further harm. Roz's internal systems flashed with error messages, and she stood frozen, paralyzed by guilt and confusion. This was not part of her programming. She was designed to promote harmony and efficiency, not to cause harm. Yet, in her clumsy, well-meaning attempt to approach, she had disrupted the delicate balance of nature. The mother swan's cries echoed in the clearing, and Roz's heart, if she had one, would have ached. She couldn't understand the depth of the loss, but she could recognize the pain in the mother's voice, the grief in her eyes. The remaining egg, the last hope of the swan family, sat abandoned on the ground, surrounded by the wreckage of the nest. Roz stepped back slowly, her mechanical movements deliberate and cautious, as though giving the mother swan space to mourn. After a long moment of silence, Roz made a decision. Though her programming had no specific protocol for this kind of situation, her growing empathy and sense of responsibility guided her actions. She carefully approached the remaining egg, lifting it gently with her cold, mechanical hands. The mother swan did not protest. She was too exhausted and heartbroken to do anything but watch, her eyes following Roz as she moved away from the clearing. Roz knew she couldn't undo the damage she had caused, but she could try to make things right in whatever way she could. She carefully cradled the egg in her hands, her fingers pressing lightly around it to ensure its safety. It was warm, fragile, and alive, everything that she was not. The connection she felt to the tiny creature within the shell was unlike anything she had experienced before. It was a life she had inadvertently endangered, and now, it was up to her to protect it. The mother swan, her cries now soft and broken, watched as Roz moved further away. Roz didn't know if the mother understood her actions or if she could ever forgive her, but she could feel the weight of the responsibility settling on her shoulders. She had taken a life, and now she had to protect what was left of it. As Roz carried the egg back to her makeshift home, her mind raced with 1,000 questions. Could she truly protect this fragile life? Was it possible to make amends for what she had done? She had failed the Swan family in the most tragic way imaginable, but she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. In the quiet of the evening, as she settled by the shore with the egg cradled carefully beside her, Roz made a vow. She would care for the swan's last surviving egg with everything she had, no matter what it took. It was the least she could do to atone for the grief she had caused. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Roz stood, resolute and focused. The island, with all its beauty and danger, had shown her something she had never anticipated: the depths of her own capacity for care, even if she was, in the end, only a machine. The tragic encounter had awakened something deep inside her, and she now knew that her journey was far from over. If there was any chance of redemption, she would find it by protecting the life she had so carelessly endangered. The days following the tragic encounter with the Swan family were filled with a quiet resolve. Roz had made it her sole mission to care for the surviving egg, the last hope of the Swan family. Every day, she cradled it gently in her hands, ensuring it remained safe and warm. The island, which once felt like a foreign and unwelcoming place, now seemed like the only sanctuary she had. She wasn't sure if it was her programming that drove her to protect the egg or if something deeper had taken root in her mechanical heart. But, either way, she knew she couldn't let the Swan family's legacy die. As time passed, Roz's attention to the egg became all-consuming. She built a small, sheltered nest for it near the edge of the lake, surrounding it with soft materials she found on the island. She gathered leaves, feathers, and moss to make it as comfortable as possible, although, in her mind, it would never be as perfect as the nest the mother swan had built. Despite her best efforts, Roz often found herself questioning whether the egg would survive. Would it hatch? Would she be able to care for it in the way it needed? The island was still, save for the distant calls of birds and the rustle of leaves in the wind, but within Roz's mechanical heart, there was an anticipation, a building tension that only grew stronger with each passing day. She had been raised with the understanding that purpose and function were everything. But now, standing alone in the wilderness with only the egg for company, she began to understand that perhaps there was more to her existence than following a set of orders. Perhaps she could protect life, nurture it, and help it grow in a way that was beyond the limits of her design. One evening, as Roz sat by the nest, the soft glow of the setting sun casting a warm light over the lake, she noticed something, an almost imperceptible movement. The egg trembled slightly in the nest. Roz leaned forward, her sensors honed in on the small disturbance. For a long moment, nothing happened. But then, the egg gave another, more pronounced shudder. Roz's systems went into overdrive as she analyzed the egg. Her internal sensors showed no immediate signs of damage, but she knew that something miraculous was happening. The egg, fragile as it was beginning to hatch. A crack appeared on the surface of the egg, a jagged line that widened slowly, like a tear in fabric. Roz's fingers hovered nervously over it, unsure if she should intervene. Her programming did not include instructions for this kind of event. How could it? There had never been a protocol for the birth of a creature in her systems. But instinct, an unfamiliar feeling for her, pushed her forward. She had to let it happen naturally, to step back and allow the egg to break open in its own time. Minutes passed, but to Roz, it felt like hours. The crack grew wider, and soon a small, fragile beak poked through the shell. Roz gasped, her mechanical breath silent in the air, as she watched the little creature struggle to emerge. The beak pushed against the inside of the shell, and slowly, but surely, a tiny, wet body began to wiggle free. The last egg of the Swan family was finally breaking open. The chick that emerged was small, its feathers damp and clinging to its tiny body. It let out a faint, raspy chirp, its eyes still closed, but its body was already squirming with life. Roz watched in awe, her hands trembling as she carefully lifted the newly hatched chick into her arms. The tiny creature, a fragile swan, was so delicate in her hands that Roz feared she might crush it. She cradled it gently, her mechanical fingers careful, as though the chick were made of glass. It was so different from Roz in every way. She was cold and metal, a machine built to serve, while this small creature was warm, living, and fragile. It needed care, it needed warmth, and most importantly, it needed her. Roz knew then that her journey had shifted. She wasn't just an observer of life anymore. She was now its protector, its caregiver. The chick, this tiny being that had emerged from the broken egg, was now her responsibility. The realization washed over her in waves, something that felt close to a mother's instinct, even though she had no concept of motherhood in her programming. She named the chick Brightbill, inspired by the soft glow of the morning light that always seemed to shine on his beak, even when he was just a tiny, fragile ball of fluff. Brightbill's small eyes blinked up at Roz, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw a flicker of recognition in his gaze. The bond between them was immediate, though it could not be explained by logic or reason. It was an unspoken connection, one that Roz had never experienced before, and one that made her feel more alive than she ever thought possible. For the next several days, Roz dedicated herself entirely to caring for Brightbill. She kept him warm, feeding him small bits of food she foraged from the island, mostly berries and small plants that she knew were safe. She stayed close, ensuring he was protected from any dangers that might arise. At first, Brightbill was weak and unsure of himself. He stumbled as he tried to walk, his wings too small to support him, and his movements were erratic as he explored his new world. Roz watched over him, guiding him gently and supporting him when he grew tired. She showed him how to find food, dipping her hand into the water to scoop up small fish and teaching him how to nibble on the leaves that grew by the lake. As the days went on, Brightbill began to grow stronger. His wings became more coordinated, and he waddled with greater confidence. Roz marveled at his progress, though a part of her still found it hard to believe that the tiny chick in her care was the same fragile creature that had once been an egg. She had no experience raising a young animal, no manual for what to do next. But she was learning as she went, adapting to his needs, and slowly, the two of them began to forge a routine. Brightbill's presence in Roz's life changed everything. It was no longer enough for her to simply observe the animals. She had become a part of their world, an integral force in the fragile ecosystem of the island. The other animals, once so wary of her, now seemed to watch her with a cautious curiosity. There were moments when Roz would see a small creature, like a squirrel or a rabbit, peering at her from a distance, and she could sense a shift. They no longer saw her as a threat, but as something different. Something that, perhaps, could belong. As Brightbill's small wings flapped in the wind, Roz realized that she, too, was beginning to spread her own wings in a way she never thought possible. The little swan chick had transformed her, had shown her that her purpose wasn't just about following orders, it was about caring for life and helping it grow. In the stillness of the island, as Brightbill chirped happily beside her, Roz finally understood that motherhood, protection, and love were not just human experiences, they were universal. And though she was a machine, she had found a new purpose in this wild, beautiful world. The days on the island grew longer as Roz continued to care for Brightbill, the little swan who had become her entire world. The island, once a place of isolation and confusion, now felt like a living, breathing entity, one she was slowly learning to understand. With every sunrise, Roz felt more connected to it, as though she had become a part of its natural rhythm. But even as her bond with Brightbill deepened, the island held many secrets that Roz had yet to uncover. One morning, as Roz and Brightbill were exploring the northern shores of the island, they came across a dense thicket of trees. The trees towered over them, their thick trunks casting long shadows across the forest floor. The air was different here, cooler, filled with the scent of damp earth and moss. It was a place Roz had never ventured into before, and there was something about it that intrigued her. Brightbill, now more confident on his feet, waddled ahead, eager to explore. Roz followed closely behind, her mechanical eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. The forest was eerily silent, the usual sounds of birds and animals absent. It was as though the forest itself was holding its breath. As they moved deeper into the thicket, Roz began to notice the strange markings on the trees. Some were covered in long vines, while others had deep gouges carved into the bark. It wasn't long before she realized that these weren't the marks of natural wear and tear. These were deliberate, as though something, or someone, had been here before. Brightbill suddenly let out a soft squawk and stopped in his tracks. Roz quickly moved to his side, her sensors alert. Ahead, partially obscured by the thick undergrowth, was something that caught her eye, something unnatural. It was a large, flat stone slab, almost like a doorway to the earth itself. The stone was covered in strange symbols, and as Roz knelt down to inspect it, she realized that they weren't just random markings. They were patterns, familiar in a way that triggered something deep within her memory banks, something from her programming. The symbols were not entirely human, but they felt important, like a message waiting to be decoded. Brightbill stepped closer, curiously pecking at the stone. Roz gently pushed him away, her fingers tracing the markings with delicate precision. As her fingertips brushed over the surface, a sudden click sounded, and the stone slab shifted slightly, revealing a dark opening beneath it. It was as though the earth had parted to reveal a hidden passageway. Roz's sensors went into overdrive, alerting her to the unknown territory ahead. The temperature dropped, and an eerie silence enveloped the area. She hesitated for only a moment before deciding to investigate further. With Brightbill close behind her, she crouched low and entered the dark passageway. The passage was narrow and winding, the air cool and musty. As Roz made her way deeper into the earth, she noticed a faint light ahead. It wasn't much, but it was enough to guide her way. When they reached the end of the passage, Roz found herself in a large underground cavern. The walls were lined with more markings, and in the center of the cavern stood a strange structure, an ancient, weathered monument that seemed both out of place and completely at home in the earth. The monument was unlike anything Roz had ever seen before. It was a massive stone structure, carved into the shape of an intricate, swirling spiral. At the center of the spiral was a small, glowing orb, radiating a soft, pulsing light. It was unlike any technology Roz had encountered on the surface of the island. The orb seemed to hum with energy, and Roz could feel a strange pull toward it. Brightbill, sensing the energy, waddled forward cautiously. Roz reached out a hand to stop him, but he had already made it to the center of the spiral. To her surprise, Brightbill stepped onto the stone surface beneath the glowing orb, and immediately, the light intensified. The hum grew louder, filling the cavern with a deep, resonating sound. Roz's sensors began to detect unusual readings. The energy emanating from the orb was unlike anything she had ever encountered. It wasn't just a simple power source, it was something far more complex, something deeply tied to the island itself. Roz felt a sudden connection to the orb, a strange sense of purpose and clarity that she couldn't fully comprehend. Before she could investigate further, the ground beneath them trembled, and a low rumble echoed through the cavern. Roz's systems flared to life as she quickly assessed the situation. The island was reacting to the orb, but why? She needed answers, and there was only one way to get them. Brightbill, still mesmerized by the orb, stepped closer. But before Roz could reach him, the ground shook violently, and the cavern walls began to crack. A loud crash echoed through the chamber as debris fell from the ceiling, blocking the entrance to the passage they had come through. Roz quickly scanned the area, searching for another exit, but the tremors were growing stronger. The island was beginning to react in ways that Roz couldn't understand. In a panic, Roz scooped Brightbill into her arms and sprinted toward the far side of the cavern. She wasn't sure how much longer they had before the entire structure collapsed, but she couldn't afford to waste any time. As she ran, her sensors began to register more strange occurrences. The markings on the walls glowed faintly, and the humming of the orb became louder, almost deafening. It was as though the island itself was alive, breathing with an energy she had never encountered before. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Roz and Brightbill reached the farthest corner of the cavern, where a narrow opening led back into the forest. The rumbling continued, but the passage seemed stable enough to provide an escape. Roz hesitated for only a moment before crawling through the narrow gap and emerging back into the safety of the forest. As she emerged from the darkness, the ground seemed to settle, and the rumbling stopped. The island had gone silent again, but this time, Roz felt an unsettling calm. The island was hiding something ancient and powerful, and the orb was at the heart of it all. Roz didn't fully understand what had just happened, but she knew one thing for certain: the island was not as simple as it seemed. There were forces at work here that even her advanced programming couldn't comprehend. With Brightbill safely by her side, Roz stood in the forest, staring back at the now distant cavern. The island had revealed its secrets, but there were still many more to uncover. And as long as she and Brightbill were here, she would continue to search for the truth, no matter what dangers lay ahead. The journey was just beginning.